Here we go. Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, February 11th, 2025 meeting of the Ashland Zoning Board of Appeals. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live by WACA-TV and live streamed on Facebook. It is a hybrid meeting, so we are obviously here in person, but also remotely. Remote participation is available using the Zoom video conferencing platform for convenience only. Any disruption with the video conferencing platform will result in the platform being shut down. However, the meeting will continue. Meetings will continue to be broadcast on WACA-TV and live streamed on Facebook. And to participate remotely, there is a link attached to the agenda posted on the town website, and there's also a telephone number you can call into in order to participate in the meeting. First order of business will be to call the meeting to order. I, John Trefethen, am present.
I, Brian Forrestall, am present.
I, Stuart Siegel, am present on Zoom.
I, Ryan Sullivan, am present.
I, Daniel May, am present.
Okay, very good, and we would like to welcome our new associate member to the board tonight, and we look forward to his participation going forward. The item on the agenda for this evening is the continuance of a public hearing that was opened and started at last month's meeting involving 10-60 Main Street. The notice that was published was the Ashland Zoning Board of Appeals will hold a public hearing to hear the petition from SLV Ashland LLC requesting a comprehensive permit per MGL Chapter 40B, Sections 20-23, to allow for the development of two multifamily story buildings for 250 apartment units and 337 concealed podium parking spaces. The applicant also proposed to restore and convert the northernmost mills, 7,500 square feet, into commercial and retail space, some of it open to the public. The property in question is located at 10-60 Main Street, Assessors Map 14, Lot 128, in the Ashland Overlay Downtown District A, parenthesis ADD-A, close parenthesis, and industrial base zoning. At our hearing last month, we agreed that the matter would be continued to this evening, and this evening we will deal with traffic issues. We had a presentation from the applicant's traffic consultant last month. The town's peer review on traffic has issued a report, and we'll deal with that. Before we get to that, though, let me just read into the record the various reports from town agencies, committees, and also the general public that we have received since the last meeting. First, dated January 14th, 2025, a one-page letter from the Ashland Conservation Commission, a one-page email from Pramod Kachandani, and I apologize if I have mispronounced the name, dated January 17th, 2025, a 20-page memorandum with attachments from the Ashland Planning Board, dated January 27th, 2025, a peer review study dated January 28th, 2025, from Hancock Associates, and the engineer, our peer review engineer, Joseph D. Pesnola and David White, a two-page report dated January 31st, 2025, from the Road Traffic Safety Committee, the 11-page report from MDM Transportation Consultants, Inc., signed by Robert J. Michaud, and an email dated February 8th, 2025, from Robert Mayer, addressed to Peter Matchik, and an email dated February 10th, 2025, from Connie Manow, consisting of 2 pages, addressed to Michael Herbert, and those will be entered into the record. And having said all of that, if you wish to review any of them, they are up on the town website in the planning department section. And we can now go on to our first, witness for the evening, and that is going to be our peer review consultant on traffic, Robert Mishaw. So, Bob, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, my name is Robert Michaud. I'm a managing principal of MDM Transportation Consultants. We're based in Marlborough, Massachusetts. I also live locally, and I'm a frequenter of many of the businesses here in town, so I'm familiar with the community. As the board is aware, and for public benefit, MDM was retained as an independent peer review consultant whose job is really to represent the town's interests and the potential impact that this particular project might have. And our purview really is to determine whether or not the submitted application materials conform with good industry practices, that the impacts of the project are properly accounted for, and that any mitigative actions that might be necessary to properly support the project, either for operational purposes or safety-based purposes, have been accounted for properly into the plans. With that, we have issued a letter stated to January 31st. It documents our primary findings in the review of the submitted traffic report, which was prepared by Vanass & Associates, who's being represented here tonight, as well as elements of the site plan from the lens of transportation and how site access is oriented, parking, site circulation, pedestrian accommodations, and the like. Right? So our purview really is very transportation oriented in those 2 aspects: the traffic study, which anticipates and documents the likely impact that a project might have, as well as the transportation elements of the site plan. And Peter, before we get into the highlights of our review, I want to say that the submitted application materials were, in fact, prepared to a good professional standard. We find that they meet with good industry practices. They're thorough, but there are a number of areas that we've requested clarification on, or that are of specific interest as they relate to public safety and future operations of the site. And it's really those highlighted elements of safety and things that need to be addressed by the applicant that I'd like to focus our attention on, rather than getting into the every point-by-point level of our review, although I am willing to answer any questions the board might have in any aspect of our review. So the next slide, Peter, really caps what we're going to talk about tonight, which there are really 6 primary elements. The first, and I think most important, is the driveway orientation along both Main Street and Myrtle Street, particularly from the standpoint of sight lines and safety. We'll talk as well a little bit about parking for the site, its adequacy, and needs to provide adequate documentation that would support that it's going to adequately address the needs of the site. Third, elements of transportation demand management. These are actions that would apply to a project that would endeavor essentially to reduce or minimize the amount of traffic that a project might generate. Fourth, the elements of a recommended monitoring program post-occupancy to ensure that the operations of the site in reality are matching up to what's predicted in the traffic reports. And finally, we get into several site plan considerations, again, from the transportation perspective, not from the water perspective or drainage or any of that. That's up to the site civil engineer, but from a transportation perspective, what are the key elements of the plan that may require some additional consideration or modification? And finally, just some miscellaneous comments and requests. So in the next slide, really we'll start with what I think is the most important aspect of the review in the project and the current orientation of driveways. There are 4 curb cuts that are being proposed for this site. There are a number of them, 3 to be exact, along Main Street and an additional driveway in Myrtle Street. The site today, in fact, has these 4 curb cuts, not necessarily in the precise location that the applicant intends in this application, but pretty close to where they are. 2 of those raise concern with us based on the unique characteristics of how traffic flows on Main Street in particular. So the Main Street driveway today is oriented at the very southerly end of the property boundary, and the applicant is intending to shift or move that driveway a bit closer to the Pleasant Street driveway, and it places that driveway well within the influence area of where queues occur on a regular basis. Ideally, with a blank slate, it would be ideal to locate a driveway, a principal driveway for the use opposite Pleasant Street to integrate it into the signal operation itself. There may be site constraints or objectives in how the site is being planned for development that may or may not preclude that ideal situation from happening, but to the extent the driveway remains in its intended location, which is just to the south of where the signal is, only several car lengths away, really, the queuing, the presence of queues during peak hours and during many hours of the day, in fact, extend up to and periodically beyond where that driveway is. And that scenario raises concern with the ability for folks who use that driveway to properly see vehicles that might be approaching the driveway, heading south toward the town center. And in fact, the requirements for sightline would not be met in a scenario in which 1 or 2 or several cars are queued on Main Street. You just simply can't pull out of that driveway and see an oncoming car very easily. And for that reason, and I'll get into this a little bit later, we would suggest, and it's in the peer review letter, that that particular driveway be considered for restrictions, either an enter-only, a right-in, right-out type operation, aspects that would minimize or entirely eliminate the potential for vehicle conflicts that could occur, which is a safety issue. There are elements of the site plan, which we'll get into later, that also may impact sightline criteria. Myrtle Street driveway is the second driveway that we focused on principally because it currently has a sightline restriction. Folks who use Main Street and proceed to Myrtle Street around that rather sharp corner are upon that driveway very quickly. It's a very difficult location to make any particular movements from today, and it's in fact a very low volume driveway, perhaps for that reason that folks aren't comfortable using that driveway because of its orientation and limitations. The site plan endeavors to use that same location and does have site features, which I'll speak to in a moment, that actually preclude good visibility to the driveway. We believe that there need to be modifications to the plans to ensure that that sight line is appropriate so that the safety-based standards for that location are met. As I'll get into as well, in the site plan aspects, we'll talk a little bit about the garage and how the access to the garage works. But those 2 key points really front and center of the peer review to ensure that the driveways are designed and operate to a safe standard. The next slide actually illustrates some of the sight lines that are proposed for the driveways. This is a plan that was developed by the applicant's engineer. They have, in a color-coded way, identified for each of the driveways the Myrtle Street driveway on the left side of this drawing in blue, the right-in, right-out limited access driveways to the central portion of the site in yellow, and the Main Street driveway to the right side of this drawing in green. What this shows, beginning on the Myrtle Street side, is that there are features of the proposed plan, namely a wall feature and some fence that are within what's known as the sightline triangle of the driveway. So for lack of moving walls and fences, your ability to see an oncoming vehicle and to select a gap in traffic is impaired if you're trying to leave that particular driveway. And that presents a safety concern. The central driveway on Main Street that serves a very limited number of parking spaces, we believe does meet applicable sightline standards and is of less concern. But the Main Street driveway, shown in green, because of the queuing conditions that occur on Main Street regularly, actually would not meet the applicable sightline standards and criteria, despite what this drawing shows, right? If no cars were on the road, and this were a perhaps early Sunday morning, you would probably meet the sightline standards in that type of a scenario, but during most of the days of the week and many hours of the day, because of the queuing conditions, that standard would not be met. And that's the concern that we raise. The next slide shows an illustrative example of the concern. This is the Main Street driveway. On the left side of this drawing is the Pleasant Street signal. You'll see some of the proposed building outlined in the upper left corner, and the location of the proposed driveway, which is, again, it's shifted closer to where the signal is today from where it currently exists. We've shown an illustration of a vehicle attempting to make a left turn in this example against a queue that regularly develops during peak hours. You can see that, and we've done video observations over an extended period of time to understand what the typical queuing conditions look like here. That's represented in the blue cars in this diagram. It would be typical or common to see a vehicle queue extended anywhere from 2 to 4 vehicles, which would in fact go up to and perhaps just slightly beyond where the proposed driveway is located. This is principally in the left turn lane, as if you're going to the T station. A vehicle would need to select a gap, if one even existed in that queue, and if doing so, would it have impaired sightline to somebody who was driving toward the driveway, and that raises a concern for sightline and visibility. The next slide would indicate, Peter, if you could just forward one more. This is an example of where if someone were attempting a left turn into that driveway, trying to work their way against that vehicle queue would in effect block any other through traffic from proceeding on Main Street. And because there's only literally 2 vehicle lengths from where that driveway is located to where the signal is, that could stand to affect how that signal works. Would represent an operational constraint. So there really are some concerns that we've raised with the orientation of the driveway as a full access driveway, and hence recommending that the applicant consider an alternative driveway location or driveway restrictions that would eliminate those types of conflicts and safety concerns. That could be an enter-only driveway as one example, or a right-in, right-out type operating driveway as an alternative. And those we've requested be evaluated. The next slides simply document what we've recorded in video for peak hours during a typical weekday operation. And you'll see in the next series of slides that it's very common, just to orient you, the site itself is on the left or upper left corner of this particular video screenshot. So as you're looking into the frame to the upper right, you'll see that's where the train tracks are. Town Hall is on the right near where Peter's arrow is. It's very common to see a vehicle queue extend to or beyond that driveway. In this example, this happened to be an afternoon period at 4:09, another one at 4:20 or so. Here's an example of what you might actually see occur today in the morning. If queues are developing from the train tracks and they're backing out because of a train crossing, for instance, if you can go back to that one, Peter, for a second, We've seen vehicles that are attempting to get to the site actually use the exclusive left turn lane to bypass the back of that queue to get into the site. That's actually a very dangerous movement. And those are the types of aggressive driving behaviors that we see happen because of the queuing conditions that exist in this particular stretch of road. So the next slide is yet another example of the inability to properly see from the driveway if you're exiting from it. So for those reasons, we've again instructed the applicant to go take another harder look at that driveway. Second point, parking. A total of 211 garage spaces are proposed. Somewhere in the order of 126 surface spaces, I believe, are proposed in combination. The ratio of parking, the total parking supply, in our experience, is generally aligned with the needs and likely demands of the project. However, no specific parking analysis was presented in the submitted materials. It's common to prepare what's known as a shared parking analysis. Shared parking analysis would identify the demand characteristics of the site in its entirety to include the commercial components along with the residential components, so that there's a clear understanding of when the ebb and flow of demand occurs and whether or not the peak demands combined between the residential parking demand and the commercial parking demand are satisfactorily met with the supply. We do point out that in the site plan there appear to be a reasonable number of surface spaces that are proximate to the commercial uses that would likely support the needs of those commercial uses. What's not clear is whether or not any portion of the surface spaces in that same zone might also need to be used by residents, right? So that shared parking analysis would highlight whether or not that was the case, whether or not there was a conflict between the parking needs of the commercial piece versus the residential. We've asked that the management protocols for parking be thought through. That is of particular interest for the commercial component, which spaces would be allocated, if you will, for commercial use versus residential use, and to what extent would the garage spaces be available for, say, visitor parking activity versus resident-only use. Right? So those types of protocols should be described in a bit more detail so that there's a clear understanding of how parking is really going to work on the site. Loading, access, and circulation is another important consideration, in that it could potentially affect parking activities on the site. So and I'll get into this in the site plan comments, there would need to be a closer evaluation of where loading access is provided, not only for services, for the commercial component, for instance, but for refuse collection and operations, as well as tenant move-in. Tenant move-in, as one example, is a very important function that typically would involve having to reserve a loading dock space, for instance, for furniture move-in, or surface spaces that would need to be identified as, or cordoned off, if you will, and reserved for that purpose as residents are moving in or moving out. So those protocols would need to be identified. The third principal area of comment is transportation demand management. There are a number of measures that should be considered in an attempt to minimize the amount of traffic that's generated by the project. One of the most significant features or actions that a developer could take would be to unbundle parking. What that really means is that residents who opt to live here would be given a choice as to whether or not they want to have a parking space on the site, and if they do, that would come at a separate cost from the lease of the residential unit. What that typically does is it encourages lower car ownership characteristics of the tenants, and oftentimes results in a lower parking demand and hence traffic generation for a project. So unbundling is a key feature and a common feature, quite frankly, of these types of projects in the 40B environment. Transit pass subsidy, it's obvious that There's some relationship between the Ashland MBTA services and this site. It's relatively close by. I think it's 3/4 of a mile away. The encouragement of that type of transit mode could be elevated through the issuance of a transit pass subsidy program by the developer. Because that T station is 3/4 of a mile away, many people may find that acceptable to walk to or from, but there are elements of what are known as last mile transportation options that should be offered or considered that would facilitate that connection. That could be, for instance, a bike share service that residents have access to a bicycle if they need to get to the train. They can borrow a bike for the day, lock it up at the train station, and take it back again. That's just one example of a last mile type connection that could be made. EV parking is a common element of projects these days, and we would anticipate and recommend that it be incorporated into this project as well. Preferential parking spaces for folks who opt to carpool or use low emission type vehicles. And finally, designation of transportation network company spaces. These would be spaces that could be used regularly by Uber, Lyft, Grubhub, food delivery services, UPS, FedEx, Amazon, short-term but important parking spaces to support these types of projects. We would envision those spaces to be one of the spaces that are in the horseshoe parking area of the site, central to the property. So those should be carefully planned and designated to some degree for that use, along with, of course, spaces for future resident, parking if they want to look at a unit or sign a lease, etc. Fourth element of review focused on monitoring suggestion for post-occupancy operations. It's very common for a project like this to have an estimated level of impact, meaning estimated trips, some assumptions as to which driveways will serve as primary driveways or not. Those types of characteristics can be measured once the site becomes operational and would be an important component of identifying the need for modifying or further restricting driveways to the extent they're not functioning the way that they were intended, et cetera. So I think the elements of a monitoring program should be advanced by the proponent as part of the project. The next slide now speaks to some of the site plan related concerns or comments that we've had. There are a number of them. If you could just advance one more slide, Peter. Looks like there's a lot here. These are not meant to scare the board that somehow the plans weren't properly developed, but there are a number of refinements that are common in this type of a process to make. Some of these are fairly minor comments, others are more substantial. The sidewalk designs are an important feature of this. We want this to be a walkable development. We want it to be development that uses the same design protocols that were recently implemented in the town center, where many new sidewalks now exist. So those same design protocols should be applied here. The design of sidewalk systems in the submitted site plan don't quite meet that standard and should be modified to reflect the design protocols of the town center for continuous sidewalk crossings through the driveways is one example. The next has to do with ensuring that the site access as well as the aisles and elements within the property around the building and then eventually exit. Likewise, delivery zones should be identified, as I previously mentioned, refuse areas where food deliveries or package deliveries would be made, and that same type of sweat path analysis should be provided for those areas of the site. I mentioned the tenant move-in. The areas in which that move-in activity would need to occur should be identified explicitly in the protocols. In other words, how do spaces get reserved? Will a dock space be available? At what times of the day might that be available? Those types of considerations should be made explicit on the plan. Then we turn our focus to Myrtle Street driveway. the alignment of that driveway is at a skewed alignment. We want to make sure that the alignment will properly serve the needs of vehicles that would need to exit. For instance, if a trash truck were coming to pick up a unit and leave the site using Myrtle Street, are they going to be able to effectively do that without having to sweep in the opposing travel lane? So doing a swept path analysis of that particular driveway for those types of vehicles would be important. As it relates to the garage, the current design anticipates a single point of access to 211 parking spaces. That garage access is located within a flood zone. And for the number of parking spaces that are being proposed, and because of the orientation of the site within a flood zone, it would be advisable to have a second means of access and egress for that garage. So to the extent there was a need to leave, that single driveway was blocked for some reason, it would afford an alternative means of getting into or out of that garage. Let's see. I mentioned earlier on the Myrtle Street driveway, there is a wall feature that's currently proposed near what's called the public plaza. That wall feature does impact the sight lines for that driveway. That would need to be designed differently than current site plan suggests to ensure that that sight line meets at least the minimum and ideally the so-called ideal sight line standard, which is at least 200 feet, if not more, right, on the approach to the driveway. Landscaping features at both the Myrtle Street driveway and the Main Street driveway would need to be designed so that it didn't preclude the ability to see vehicles. The site, anything planted within a sightline triangle would need to be planted in such a manner that it didn't exceed a certain height, or that the canopy of a tree planting did not impair your visibility to that vehicle. So landscaping plans will have to carefully consider the impact to the sightline triangles that I mentioned earlier. And finally, there should be some accommodation, explicit accommodation for bicycle facilities in this particular project. For the reasons I mentioned before, it's a site we want to be multimodal to the extent possible. Its orientation to the MBTA station is an asset, and it should be leveraged by affording folks who want to use bicycle features, for instance, as one example, as a mode of transportation. So those should be explicitly accounted for. And finally, there are a number of smaller comments that we've made in the peer review that the applicant's engineer is in process of addressing, we believe, and they would have to do with certain underlying assumptions of traffic volume and the seasonal factors associated with volumes that were collected and used in the analysis. We suggest some adjustment to that analysis. We don't believe that the adjustments that would be forthcoming would materially affect the outcome of the analysis. It wouldn't change the underlying findings that we've just outlined. There is one location that we question whether or not it should have been included in the study, and that is the Pine Hill Road intersection. The Myrtle Street driveway will be a principal driveway for the site. At least half of the traffic from this development will be inclined to go up north and east toward Framingham as part of their normal commute. That would represent more than a 5% change in volume at the very first intersection that you come to just beyond the dam, which is Pine Hill Road. Pine Hill Road does provide an alternative means of getting to Oak Street, eventually Route 9, and perhaps even the Mass Pike. That intersection and that roadway system, for those reasons, may want to be included for evaluation in the study. And we pointed that out in our formal letter. So that's the gist of our review. Those are the principal points. I'm more than glad to answer any specific questions the board might have. And I believe the applicant, the applicant's engineer who I have been in contact with, is in process of starting to address some of these points.
Thank you, Bob. Members of the board, any questions for our consultant at this point? Not for me. Great job. Thank you. No? Stu, you all set? Stu, any questions for Mr. Michaud? Nope, okay.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask about if signage was considered in the study and how that kind of impacts vehicle knowledge. And I feel like there's many different ways to enter and exit, and there's going to be a variety of different uses. Like you mentioned, you could have Uber, Lyft, people moving in, moving out, and so just how signage kind of plays a role into organizing that, making that function.
Yes, that is a good question. I think what you're referring to is wayfinding signs, right, that would provide some guidance to someone who's not familiar with the site as to where the main entrance is, where parking for visitors might be, for instance, or if you're a delivery vehicle, where that delivery should be made. So it's a good question. We didn't see any particular signs or wayfinding package that's been advanced to date, but it's certainly something that is an important part of any project. Part of the design of a project isn't necessarily signs themselves, but the design of the building and the orientation of what appears to be the main entrance, the visitor entrance to a site. So we don't have any particular comment at this time on wayfinding, but it is certainly something that the applicant should consider and that the board should discuss to ensure that if deliveries are being made, that it's clear to an Amazon truck or a UPS delivery person or someone in a food delivery service that they should be at a certain location on the site. And I think that the signs and perhaps even the design of the building itself would foster that understanding, that knowledge intuitively. For visitor activity, clearly part of what we've suggested the applicant respond to is this parking protocol, right? So if I'm a visitor, I'm going to this building, I'd want to understand where I should be parking and how to get to that parking. So part of that protocol could in fact be the wayfinding signs that you mentioned as part of the ongoing considerations. It clearly, as it involves service vehicles, we believe that there would be a scheduling process that the applicant would need to establish with a refuse hauler, for instance, and that that protocol, that schedule would indicate which driveway should be used, where those refuse bins are located, the hours in which that type of activity could occur, all of which is going to be subject to this board's discretion and determination. And so wayfinding isn't necessarily all about signs. It's also about protocols that are established as part of the management of the building with service providers.
Any other questions? Before we turn it over and ask the applicant to comment, and I understand the traffic consultant and you have communicated and they're working on some plans, and we can, go into that a little bit. I was remiss at the outset in not introducing Peter Matchik, our town planner, Alvaro Esparza, our assistant town planner, and town council Lisa Mead, who are also sitting with us this evening. Mr. Engler, do you want to either respond or have your traffic consultant, just sort of respond to where we are and how you think we might be able to proceed on this issue?
Do I have to start again, or are we, okay?
And maybe just to make sure it's
Okay. All right, pretend
recorded.
you didn't hear any of that. For the record, Jeff Engler, principal in SLV Ashland, the applicant. I appreciate the board and Mr. Mishaw's thorough analysis. We received this last week, so we're still in the process of going through all of it. I can promise the board probably in the next 2 weeks we'll have a comprehensive written response, including exhibits. I think a lot of what Mr. Misha identified we have already contemplated. I think some of our plans probably didn't do the best job in highlighting some of the things Bob asked for. So the way we would expect it to work, and our traffic engineer, Jeff Dirk, is here, and he's going to provide some preliminary comments, but we would hope to have a formal written response in the next couple weeks, submit that to the board, who can then turn it over to Mr. Misha and have him review, so that by the time we have the next public hearing, we're kind of just, I would hope 90% of our response, he can say, all right, this addresses it. There'll probably be some that maybe he still has some questions or need discussion, and we can use part of the next hearing to do that. But I don't think anything that we heard tonight was, totally outrageous or something that, is out of the blue. With that said, I'd like Jeff Dirk just to talk at a high level about some of the comments, some of what we've been up to, and then we'll be happy to answer any specific questions anyone has. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, for your record, Jeffrey Dirk, the managing partner with Vanessa Associates. So I think as you heard Jeff mention, we were obviously in receipt of the peer review comment letter, and I think just kind of as the outset, and I think Bob and I have worked together for quite a long time, the intent of the peer review, I think, is something that is well served, as you see in the comment letter, which is really from the standpoint of the transportation analysis is really kind of kicking the tires on some of the assumptions that were made in the transportation study to make sure that you're comfortable in terms of the analysis and the representation of the project's impacts as it's presented to you. So I think as you heard Jeff mention, we take no exception to any of the comments. We're going to fully address all of those. So just kind of 2 points in terms of addressing the comments. The board had in fact asked about that additional intersection, I think at the last public hearing when we made the initial presentation. So those traffic counts, were done today. So nice sunny weather before the inclement weather, I guess, is coming over the next couple of days. So those traffic counts are actually done. I should be receiving those. Your town planner, within a day of asking one of the background projects, which is the 100 Chestnut Street project, which I think the member that's on Zoom had said, we were remiss in not including that in the transportation analysis. Your town planner got back to me the same day I'd asked for that traffic study, so we have that information. So we'll be including that as a part of our analysis as well. So I think town staff has been excellent in getting us any information that we've asked for to incorporate into the traffic study. So I think even since our initial presentation, we've been getting feedback. And I think as Jeff had mentioned, looking at the plans based on some of the initial feedback that we received. And it's generally consistent with what you had seen in the response to, or the comment letter that Mr. Michaud had issued. So we're working through all of those items. As it relates to the access into the property, the Myrtle Street driveway was one of the areas that we had identified very early on that the existing conditions there presented some sight line limitations. So we had identified in the transportation study. Just for clarification, what was shown for the site triangle areas was not to imply in any way that the available site distance met all of the required criteria. The intent of that drawing was for the project team to have that, to understand the locations where we can't have objects. So there was no implication at all that we were trying to convey that those were the proper sight lines. So I just want to kind of clarify that because I think there was some misrepresentation of the drawing that you had seen. However, it is true that what the intent was to show these are the site triangle areas we need to have. These are the distances that need to be provided. And I think what's been asked of us is to demonstrate that we have the proper site distances. So we are going to be doing that. We will provide the site modifications for the Myrtle Street driveway to meet the site distance criteria. As you heard from your peer review consultant, the one-way loop that we have at the front of the building, the driveway meets the site distance criteria. What we've termed as the southern driveway or the Main Street driveway, we recognize the limitations that were pointed out as it relates to vehicle queuing. So what we will be doing as a part of this supplemental analysis, we'll be providing in response to the comments, is looking at that driveway as a right-in, right-out. We do need to have, we'll call it full circulation, just given the fact that the driveway, as you look at the circulation within the site, you circumnavigate the site. So we need the ability of vehicles to be able to enter and exit that driveway, but we can make the left turns happen at the Myrtle Street driveway, so that that's a location where we'll focus on making sure we've got the sight lines that are required for the speed of traffic that's approaching that driveway. So we'll be demonstrating that. So I think just kind of as an overall, we're going to respond to every comment that's been provided. A number of them, I think, just require some refinements of the analysis. And I think what you heard your review consultant say is that as it relates to the transportation analysis, we're going to make some refinements, but as it relates to the overall impact of the project that's been presented, that's not going to really change too much. So our focus is going to be on safety, parking, and circulation within the project site. And then just lastly, I would offer that the wayfinding signs that you had mentioned, it becomes more critical as we look at limiting the access to that one driveway. Because if that driveway becomes right in, right out, and all of a sudden you're circulating with the site, we don't want someone coming out there saying, oh gosh, I can't make a left-hand turn, and trying to do that. So I think, consistent with your comment, we'll be making more of an attempt to show those type of plans, signs on the plans where they might be located, so that it provides a clearer direction, not only for the deliveries as was discussed, but also when we have that sight line limit or the access restriction, we want to make sure people know where the proper driveway is to be used. So I think, as you heard, we're probably within a couple of weeks we'll have a response to that. Again, it was thankful to town staff to providing the information that we needed. We know we needed to add that one additional intersection, so we started that early on so that we can continue the process, move it along as efficiently as possible. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Yes, one question I have. Mr. Misha referenced, and I'm not going to have the correct technical term, but it was basically sort of a study to make sure that fire trucks have adequate. And
right.
Did you do that
So
test? And if so, is it somewhere in this report?
Yeah, it's called a swept path analysis, and there wasn't something that we did. The site engineer would be.
Mr. Chairman, that's typically done by the civil engineer, and we did do that. We'd not submitted it, but one of the things that we look at very closely is exactly that, making sure typically the largest fire truck in the town can safely navigate the entirety of the site. So we'll do that. I mean, there were lots of things that we need to have exhibits for. We'd contemplated loading and unloading. We just didn't do a very good job showing it on the plans. Some of those other things, we're going to have a bunch of exhibits, and how we respond to the peer review letter that kind of highlight. One of the things that we're doing as it relates to parking, it's been brought up, is we're going to do some sort of color-coded analysis that shows, guest, Uber, Lyft, residential, commercial, shared, so people, the board, Mr. Mishak, can see our vision for how the parking will work on the site. So all of those things will be forthcoming sooner rather than later, and will be included in what we submit to the town for subsequent review.
Okay. Let me ask my fellow board members, any questions of the traffic engineer?
Not at this time, no.
Yes, just in regards to, you said you would provide some kind of illustration that shows, what type of vehicles will be coming in what certain ways.
Right.
But just understanding from that vehicle's perspective, how they would know which entrance to use, and they're not all coming to the same entrance or using the wrong one.
So one of the things that your review consultant asked for is we'll call it kind of a management plan as it relates to pickups and drop-offs, as well, Uber, Lyft, deliveries, things like that. So we will articulate that in a narrative, but also as a part of that swept path analysis, it's to demonstrate that the vehicles, as described in the narrative, in terms of where will they enter the site, where do they go, and then how do they exit the site, that's all tied together. So I think a lot of this as well is tying up those loose ends so that we create a story, both as a narrative, and also in the drawing, so that you'll be able to look and say, okay, well, they've said deliveries are going to come, let's just say between, deliveries are going to happen, say, after the peak hours. So let's say it's 9 to 12 or something like that. And they're going to use this specific driveway because let's say we have a turn restriction at the Main Street driveway. So they come in the Myrtle Street driveway, they circulate around the site, they do whatever they're going to do in the proper areas, and then where do they exit? Do they come out the Main Street driveway, or do we come back out to the Myrtle Street driveway? So we'll have a narrative that describes the hours that will take, that those things might happen, where they will occur in the site, and then how they will circulate, and then we'll have a drawing that shows that as well, so that you can marry both of those things up.
Yeah, I would, just to further clarify, I think what I'm saying is more geared towards visitors unknown to the
Yes,
property.
right.
That would have no knowledge of which, entrance to use and where to go.
Right, so I think that's where the wayfinding signs, a combination of wayfinding signs, but it also can be done, we were talking about the Transportation Demand Management Program. One of the things, as you know, is most projects have a website. So as you're someone who's new, who's coming to the property, and you may be looking at the website, there's some information that can be provided saying, where the visitor parking is, a map online that shows you where that is as well. So I think we can kind of work on a combination of things to describe how that would, how people would be informed as to how that would happen, but also if you don't have that information prior to coming to the site, that there's proper signage that shows you how to get there.
Excellent, thank you.
I mean, as it relates to signage, some big things like right turn only or whatnot, I think we can reflect, but the full signage package, we would expect the board and council, maybe as a condition to the permit, to make, because a lot of this stuff, to be honest with you, some of it is a little bit early relative to where we are in the process, but as a prerequisite to, say, getting a building permit, us demonstrating that we have a full signage package fleshed out. In terms of, because frankly, a few of the things are a little nuanced and we don't even know. Your point's very well taken. We do, it's in our best interest to make sure people entering the project know exactly where to go, whether they're loading, whether they're visitors, whether they're residents, whether they're FedEx, whoever it is. So, so the big ones like a right turn only or something like that, certainly we will show that on a plan, but some of the more nuanced ones, I'm not sure we're going to have a plan yet that has all of the various signage that we anticipate, that'll be reflected in the final plan. Not now, we will have it, and the board can make that a condition of getting a building permit, so you'll have adequate leverage. But I would just say a few of the things that you're talking about usually come a little further down.
Yes, and again, just to further clarify, I think it's more about the entry points. And then also in the peer review was included the commercial space and, just another added opportunity for unknown people entering the site.
Right. And I think to Jeff's point, really, I think at this point it'll be like at a conceptual level. And I think that's an intent and description of how that would work. And then the details are in the final plans, but we can do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Stu, have any questions for the traffic engineer? You're muted.
Not at this point, sir.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, as we did at the initial hearing date, we did open the matter up for public comment, limited to traffic tonight. There will be other hearing dates in the future where we'll address different subjects with the opportunity to have those questions asked. So if anyone present in the room wishes to ask a question about the traffic that you sort of heard tonight, please line up over here. If you're online and wish to ask a question, please raise your hand and Peter will bring you in on the right time. Okay, we have one person standing up and he's got a sheet of paper, so he's got his questions written down. Mr. DeSoni, would you like to step to the podium and introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you. Mark DeSoni, 119 Main Street. I came into the office and made sure that what I'm gonna say, everybody does hear about. The zoning scope for parking and the flow-ins from section 5.0 in our zone, this is all questions from the zoning codes, our zoning bylaws. The off-street parking, would that have any talking points to that?
I don't quite understand what your question is with, as part of the comprehensive permit application, the applicant has requested waivers of a number of the different zoning requirements, and off the top of my head, I do not remember whether number of parking spaces is part of it or not. I would anticipate that it probably is one of the waivers that they are requesting, and it would be up to the board to determine whether or not to allow such a waiver.
Okay. Because it says for both new and old structures, that's gotta be included in it with the parking and spaces and stuff like that. The structure, 300 feet site distance for entrance and exits. Is that going to be completely 300, or is it going to be different?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand your question, Mr. DeSoni.
With the exits, now we've got two exits, Myrtle Street, Main Street, Pleasant Street. There's going to be different sight lines leaving the parking lot. Is there going to be up to 300 feet maximum for it to be coded correctly?
Well, I think at this point, what we can say is that our traffic consultant and their traffic engineer are going to work on what the design is and to ensure safety for the public, and what that ultimately is going to result in, I think we probably can't say at the moment, but I can promise this: the board is going to ensure public safety to the fullest extent that we can as part of this process. Recognizing that we're still fairly early in the game when it comes to traffic and safety. It's a large project, and it's an old site with old buildings and in a spot that is not ideal for a large development, perhaps, but there's work to be done, and the developer has indicated a willingness to do that work. The board, with its traffic consultant and peer review consultant, is going to work ultimately with public safety in mind.
Okay, and some of the other things I have is not traffic related, so I'll skip around.
Please.
Boundaries, outside, does the have a help with the traffic, the boundaries of the lot, the parking lot, parking spaces. When they have a flow, the inside, there's got to be the parking spaces and the solid line for backing out. With this people leaving, is that going to be considered in the traffic flow from parking for parked cars?
I think that's something that's going to be better addressed in the civil engineering issue, and that's going to be the subject of a future meeting, which we will discuss when we sort of finish the testimony and the questions tonight about scheduling civil engineering. We have a peer review, a civil engineer that has submitted a report, and that will be one of the issues that will be addressed during that, I believe.
Okay. And walkways, is this being used on this project, walkways safety reasons.
And walkways, again, part of the civil engineering, I think. It's sort of mixed with traffic. Obviously, there are going to be requirements for sidewalks. I think there may, and I'm speaking just for myself, not for the board, but I think there is a desire to have the sidewalks mesh with the sidewalks that have been constructed in the downtown section recently, so that there's sort of a natural flow, if it were, but I don't think that's something that the traffic engineers by themselves are going to be able to address.
It was
More of a civil engineering issue.
I'm sorry. Okay, and it was a continued walkway for residents and along with the project. Okay.
Mark, we've allowed you to ask a lot of questions because there are not a lot of people
Okay,
backed up,
can
but
I finish?
generally, we limit it to a couple of minutes each, so
Okay, can I finish with,
by all means.
I will finish with this. I'll cut to the chase, in other words. Okay. For today's traffic as of now, but most be truthfully explain what it will be in the future for projects down the road. My own negative personal opinion is it's not ready, but we're going to have future residents coming in to try to work in here, which is going to build up more traffic. So I'm just going to make sure that the traffic can be updated with a good flow, and just with business and residential works. And I see the traffic every single day where I am now 119 Main Street. And yes, it cuts back because of the trains, but it also can be real busy in the late morning and middle of the afternoons because of people going through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bissoni. Mr. Small.
Thank you. Doug Small, DPW Director. Just a couple quick things. With snow and ice season here, one of the issues we're running into right now is a lot of overnight parking on Main Street, and that's turned into a bigger and bigger issue every year. So that's one. Number two was, when I looked at the initial plans, the count you had for the vehicles in the proposed project, it just seemed awful low compared to the number of spots and the number of units. So those are just the two comments, quick comments. I know it's a little bit early. You're going to be able to address everything that's been presented today. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug.
Carolyn Bell, Concord Street. From what I understand, a right turn from Main Street into the unit makes sense, but the exit is going to be a problem. Because if you exit onto Myrtle Street, which is kind of a blind corner, and I think you indicated there would be a left turn at Myrtle, pulling out of there with 200 cars coming in and out all day, you're going to try to turn left on Myrtle Street with the traffic coming in two directions. You mentioned going up Pine Hill Road, which is a steep road, 2 lanes. And then where are they going to go? If they want to go towards Market Basket, for instance, they're going to turn around, take a right turn out of Granite Street. Take a right turn out of Myrtle Street, go down the former Granite Street, which is now Raymond Marchetti. That's cars. That's 2 lanes. That's congested. Then it's going to go up Concord Street, where you already have a school and school traffic twice a day. And then it's going to get to the bridge. And when they get to the bridge, you've got public traffic, you've got the police and fire. So you're not just talking Myrtle Street. You're talking about 200 cars going where? And you can't tell me anybody's going to take a left turn out of Myrtle Street. I'm sorry, onto Myrtle Street, because that would be crazy. And the one thing I've heard about people in town, we know there needs to be housing. we agree with that. But the one thing I've heard is Myrtle Street traffic, Main Street traffic. And I'm not convinced that you're addressing this problem. I just don't see it. Unless you put a street light opposite onto Myrtle Street, you could do that. But then how are you then you're going to have a real clog. And not only that, if you're going up that street, that's again a very curvy, narrow street. You're putting all those cars going towards Mass Pike. So I think you have to look at this. Yeah, I'm not challenging your professional expertise, but I'm saying, having lived in town, gone up and down that street every day of my life practically for years, that's asking people to make a left turn onto Myrtle or even go right and go up Raymond Marquetti. That's a challenge.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the applicants, thank you for the presentation and some of the explanations. And Mr. Michaud, thank you for your expertise on that.
Would you please identify
Oh, I'm sorry.
yourself
My name
for
is
the
Joseph
record?
Mignani, 2 Harper Lane, current member of the board of the Select Board, but I'm also the chair of the Roadway Traffic Safety Committee. And we have some concerns. Traffic is like water. It looks for the least resistance. And you're going to find people cutting down Winter Street to avoid that intersection. Because if they follow the traffic pattern, they go all the way down from Cordova Road to Pleasant Street, and they come to that intersection, and they see what's happening and the type of traffic that's involved. Well, they're not stupid. They're going to turn onto Winter Street, and now you'll have a large amount of traffic heading down Winter Street through the side roads, they're not wide roads, but you folks live in town, you know what I'm referring to. They're side roads. So we need to make sure that this traffic study is done properly so that you have a great flow of traffic that has the least resistance of bottling up during the hours of rush hour between 6:30 and 9. Don't forget you have to add the traffic of the trains that come through town. And there are quite a number of train stops that happen, especially in the morning and in the evening, from 4:30 to 6:30, and even 6:45 for that matter. If you try to come down off of High Street onto Pleasant Street during any time of those hours, you're waiting 15 to 20 minutes just to get out there because of the traffic flow. So I strongly urge everybody to work together on this to try to resolve this. And in addition to that, being a former police officer, retired for 34 years here, there is a law, Chapter 90 law, that if you exit a driveway, you cannot turn left and take 2 lanes to queue on left. That's the state law. So when you come out when you come out of the driveway onto Main Street and you want to turn left, you're breaking the law. And it's on the books. Is it enforced? Hell no. But if there ever was an accident, someone can hang their hat on that. So we need to work together to make sure this works for everybody, for your new residents that come into town, and for the people that have been here for a number of years, and for the residents who are going to be really impacted by this. You made mention at the last time we were talking about the folks on Water Street. We're having an issue now where people are cutting through Water Street to make sure they want to stay away from that intersection because it's always congested. So that will definitely happen with Pine Hill Road residents. It will surely happen on Raymond Marquetti Way, where there's only one sidewalk, and a lot of kids walk to school from there. That is a low-income housing area there, and there's a lot of kids there. So we need to make sure that all of us, all of you folks, that make those decisions when it comes to the traffic study, that it incorporates all these little things that we may not think about, because it definitely impacts the livelihood and the safety of all of us who live here and who will soon live here in town. So I just ask that you all work together on this, and be happy to work with you on this as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Before I go to the next one at the podium, sorry, you can come up to the podium. I just need to call on and ask Bob and Joan on Friday, who have been waiting patiently. Joan, I have now asked you to unmute.
Hello, Joan Confrati on the Historical Commission, speaking as an independent resident, and my husband Bob here with me. I have a few basically comments. One is they were talking about the Main Street in and out. One thought that I had was when they make the turn is to make the turn in and out with an island in between so they can only go in and out. The other was to move the buildings back and add turning lanes on Main Street. I believe there's generally not enough parking. I think, what if people want more parking stickers than there are spaces? Where are they going to park? They're going to park downtown. They're going to park on the streets. And as Doug mentioned, they're already having a problem with overnight parking. Maybe add a van to the MBTA. Bikes in the winter. Bikes are a great idea, but in the winter, people are not going to ride bikes. And when they do ride bikes, that also adds to the safety on the roads in that area. A school bus stop. I didn't see anything about a school bus stop. I'd like to see how they're planning on making that happen. Also with the sweeps, if they have to go, and well, soon they're not going to go into the facility, which means they're going to stop right in front of the building on Main Street. So how are they going to do that? Is there going to be a second access in the parking garage? I heard them say that the peer reviews say that there should be, I believe it was. My concern is EV fires. One of the things that they talk about a lot, even in Consumer Reports, is that EV fires take an extremely large amount of water to put out. Will there be sprinklers in the garage? And will the new ladder be able to reach the roof of the 6th floor building in the back? So those are my comments. I would like to say that I took a look at the Bancroft building that I believe these folks built, and which is appropriate for that location. And I think they build a nice facility. I don't think they can honestly say that the size of this project and the scope of this project is appropriate for the middle of the small town of downtown of Ashland. So thank you very much. Thank you for all the presentations.
Thank you. Anyone else online, Peter, that wishes to speak? Because we had taken several people in person.
Right now, we have nobody online with their hand up.
Ma'am, you would come up.
Connie Mantle, Newcastle Road. I have a comment and a question. And the comment is that my dentist is in the building that's currently there right now. And I can tell you from experience that coming out of the Myrtle Street exit and turning left is really tricky because it's a blind turn. And to Dave Mignani's point, it should be illegal. And it's a scary thing. You really have to be very careful. The other thing is a question. There are a lot more apartments in the pipeline. 579 more beyond the Asher, the Chestnut Street apartments. Have those additional drivers been taken into consideration in your study?
There were information that Peter had provided to the town's traffic engineer to take into consideration at 100 Chestnut Street, I believe they said. And any others, Peter, that we've given them information on?
As to date, no. I know we have the United, the UGC property, which is part of that 100, that 500 number. That's a 40B project that was permitted in 2021 on Memorial Drive. And then additionally, I think, Connie, that you're talking about 501 Pond Street, which was permitted by the planning board. That's over on Pond Street, so I think that may be outside of the regulation. So I think I have provided to the applicant, at the applicant's request, any development and/or traffic report within the downtown core. And the report for 100 Chestnut Street, Village of the Americas, was shared with Vanasse Associates.
Okay. There's the Oasis near the high school. I don't know if that's going to impact it or not, but that's 250 units. And the Arabella on West Union, 180 units. Just saying.
So Arbella and UGC are the same thing.
Same thing.
Yeah, that's the same thing. Arbella is the name of the development, and then the developer is the United Group of Companies.
I see.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
And then the 40B over on West Union Street, that's 226 units, but that project has not filed yet with the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Okay. There's a lot of new units in the pipeline, though, and there's going to be a lot more traffic in Ashland. Thank you.
Okay, this is going to be the last public comment that we'll take this evening.
Margie Gassell, 8 Adams Road. Mr. Michaud, I'm wondering if it's within your purview to evaluate whether or even how well Ashland can actually accommodate the number of additional cars that will result from this development.
I'm sorry, ma'am, what was your question?
At the last hearing, we were given numbers about how many additional cars would be generated as a result of this development. And my question is whether it's within his purview to evaluate how well Ashland can accommodate those additional cars given our current traffic situation.
Well, that's, Bob, do you have a response?
Sure, through the chair. So our purview is to determine whether or not the impacts of the project were properly characterized and analyzed. And we use certain standards to determine that are recognized standards. When a traffic study is prepared, there's an analysis that identifies the amount of average delay and queuing that occurs, and the underlying assumptions that are used to determine that are taken into the future years, right? So we look at what happens today. The applicant's engineer analyzes that baseline condition. In the course of our review, we go out into the field. We actually look at, and in this case, we actually recorded traffic flow conditions and looked at those conditions to determine whether or not they were consistent with what the analysis is showing in the materials. The analysis is consistent with what we've seen. We understand queuing occurs. I've presented that information, but the average amount of delays that are occurring, the typical amount of queuing that occurs are properly analyzed in here. Those are then extrapolated out to 7 years from now, right, to include growth from other projects like 100 Chestnut Street is one example. That analysis is redone, and then there are trips added by this project that are estimated using industry standards that are added to that number and reanalyzed. So what the report shows, and it has been done to a good standard, right, an industry standard, is that the impact of the project can be accommodated within the roadway system that exists today. It doesn't mean that there won't be delays, and it doesn't mean that there won't be queues, but we can see the relative change in those delays and those queues when you add in these types of trips from this project. And what their study shows is that there will be increased delay, there will be increased queues, but not to a point that it's going to be breaking anything, if you will. A queue that might last 20 seconds on average or 30 seconds on average without this project built might become 31 or 32 seconds. Right? So there will be a change, but it will not be a large change under what's called the no-build condition. So your question is a fairly broad question, right? Can the town accommodate this additional traffic. It's a question that many people and many communities ask, whether it's of us or other applicants or engineers, and the answer is that the analysis techniques that we used and the criteria that we use to analyze projects, those criteria are met for this project. They're properly quantified. So our belief is that adequate capacity will be available. It doesn't mean that when train crossings happen, it's not going to be a mess for a little while, right? That happens today. It's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen 7 years from now. But this project isn't going to make those materially worse. And obviously, safety is paramount. And really, the focus of most of our comments has been safety-based. You know, can a fire truck get in and out safely? Can someone make a turn from a driveway safely? Those types of questions. Those are as important, if not more important, than are you going to experience 2 more seconds of delay? So, so I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, you have.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, I had said that was going to be the last public comment, but somebody snuck in, so.
Okay, well.
This will be the last.
Short.
I was going to say, I was about to say, I will allow you, but this, once and for all, is the last public comment for this evening. And if, please just identify yourself, name and address, if you would, please.
My name is Bob Powderly. I'm an Ashland resident. That clip you had showing the traffic as it is now, save it, because someday we'll be saying, this is what it used to look like.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. It was certainly short, thank you. Okay, that will eliminate public comment for this evening. And why don't we discuss how we're going to proceed going forward? Mr. Engler, if you wouldn't mind going back to the microphone and we can discuss that. Our next scheduled meeting is on February 25th. However, we already have 2 separate hearings that have been noticed and scheduled for that date. And in sounding about when your traffic consultant's analysis and response is going to be ready, it's going to take a couple of weeks. So my thought is we probably would be better off rescheduling this or continuing this to the second Tuesday in March, which would be March 11th, where we can continue with the traffic discussion, but I'd also like to go on to the next big area, I think, which is the civil engineering. I know our peer reviewer, excuse me, has filed his report, and we'd like to do that, and thereafter pick up the pace, because one meeting a month isn't gonna do it. We're gonna start having to have, I think, 2 meetings as we start to get some momentum on this project. Your thoughts?
I think that's well conceived. I think we're going to endeavor to get a formal written response to the MDM letter within the next couple of weeks, along with all the exhibits. One of the things is a little bit, I hope, but like for instance, a second access point for the garage. That's not necessary. I'm not saying we're not doing it. We're going to look at, but that's not something we can just say, oh, it's a little bit more involved. Hopefully we can, so there, maybe we're only 95% responsive in the letter, but my point is I think March 11th is effectively a month from tonight. We can get that letter submitted with all the exhibits. I hope that our civil engineering team will have their letter submitted by then. I'll push them to do as much. So I think March 11th will be at a minimum very comprehensive relative to traffic, hopefully civil, and then all the meetings thereafter, there'll be plenty to do.
Okay, good. Before I entertain a motion to continue this hearing to March 11th, we have an additional peer review consultant that we were working on retaining, and that was architecture. And Peter, can you tell me where we stand on that?
Correct.
Whether we
So-
need to take a vote tonight?
Tonight, we're not going to take a vote. I received a scope of services from them, and that was kind of sent to the applicant. And upon his request, I have made inquiry to our architectural engineer to get a greater knowledge of projects they have looked at in comparison to our projects. And we're still working through that. So at this time, we're going to table it, but please do know that, just like the transportation and the civil, we are going to talk about architecture at some point. So that's still in the works, and just obviously stay tuned.
Okay, very good. Anything else we need to do tonight on this before we have a motion to continue to March 11th?
In my eyes, no, but I would obviously confirm that with council. But yes, we're all set.
Would someone like to make a motion to continue the hearing to Tuesday, March 11th at 7 p.m.?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Okay, and we're going to take a roll call vote. I, John Trefethan, vote in favor.
I, Brian Forrestall, vote in favor.
Oh.
I, Stuart Siegel, vote in favor.
I, Ryan Sullivan, vote in favor.
I, Daniel May, vote in favor.
Okay, excellent. This hearing is continued until March 11th. Next item on the agenda is consideration and approval of the meeting minutes for our last meeting on January 7th, 2025. Thank you, Mr. Michaud.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, we're still in meeting, folks, so please. Okay, attached to the binder that we were given tonight were some revisions to the draft minutes that were sent out to us last week. The changes have been highlighted in red. Stu, we apologize for the misspelling of your last name. Okay, we'll get that right. Any questions on the revisions or the original minutes? We are all set to vote on them. Someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes for the January 7th, 2025 meeting as revised, I guess I should say.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I, John Trefethan, vote in favor.
I, Brian Forrestall, vote in favor.
I, Stuart Siegel, vote in favor.
I, Ryan Sullivan, vote in favor.
I, Daniel May, vote in favor.
Next item is staff updates and administrative matters. Peter, we have 2 hearings scheduled.
We have 2 scheduled hearings at the next meeting. Number 1 is going to be an application on 35 Nickerson Road. And number 2 is going to be a 40B application, which is going to be from Habitat for Humanity, which is going to be at Main Street at 487 Main Street. It's actually, right now, it looks like a vacant lot. Has a little bit of a backstory to it. However, Habitat for Humanity is moving forward with a 1-lot 40B.
Okay, very good. Anything else administratively that we need to talk about?
At this point, no.
Okay. Then a motion to adjourn, I think, is appropriate.
So moved.
And is there a second for that?
Seconded.
Okay, I, John Trefethan, vote in favor.
I, Brian Forrestall, vote in favor.
I, Stuart Siegel, vote in favor.
I, Ryan Sullivan, vote in favor.
I, Daniel May, vote in favor.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. Good evening. Thank you, WACA.